Jensen here. Today we are going to make a beef and stellini soup with a pepperoni, grilled cheese, and some lemon blueberry scones. So we're going to first start off by cubing up our chuck roast. We're going to season it, sear it off, then we'll remove it out and get kind of our aromatic vegetables cooking up for the base of our soup. We're going to have a lovely kind of like a beefy tomato broth base for it. Looks like a pretty lean cut here, so I don't think there's much I need to trim off. I'm going to cube it up fairly small so that we have nice small chunks in our stew on here. And again, I'll probably sear it off in little batches. And then we will prep up our scones. We'll make a lovely lemon glaze to go on top of them. Just a nice little bright little treat here today. Such nice weather, which is so, we went from having such cold weather, freezing weather like a week ago to 70 degrees. And it is so nice. We were doing some yard work outside and Jack was having a blast with helping us out there, and just playing and getting the yard back into tip-top shape for the spring. And me dreaming about what I'm going to plant in my garden, and how I'm going to rearrange everything because I'm moving my garden beds around because some of my trees have grown so big that they provide too much shade. And last year my garden didn't produce as much because they've kind of overgrown some of those areas. But it's always nice. It's always, it's like what we call like a blackberry winter or something like that, where it's like a fake winter or fake summer or spring, I should say. And I know it's going to get cold again. We'll have another cold spell here in a couple weeks. But it's nice when you get one of these nice little, forget that it's still the middle of winter. They still need one more snow day weekend for the kids, but we'll enjoy this nice warm weather while it lasts. I said if it lasts through the weekends, I said we should do a couple, I should make some homemade graham crackers and we should make s'mores outside, and burn up some of these tree limbs that fell from the ice storm because we have a lot of them. Luckily, although, I was going out there and I was like, okay, let's serve it. Every single giant branch that fell in like the most perfect spot that it like missed our play set or the kids' art easel or cars or fences of the house. We were just really, really lucky. And then they landed where they didn't have much clearance on any side, but they just fell perfectly. So we were very, very fortunate about that. Okay, we've almost got all of these guys cubed up. Again, this is just a lovely chuck roast that we're going to dice up. We'll season, and then we'll sear it off in our pan. And that way we have just some lovely little meat chunks here. Should be good. Give my hands a little rinse. And for our meat seasoning, we're going to keep it fairly simple. We're going to do a little bit of garlic salt. I'm going to use up the rest of this one, which is a little more in there than I thought. And add a splash more. A little bit of black pepper. Kind of sprinkle over. And then a little bit of herbes de Provence, which is kind of like an Italian, or not a French seasoning. Has just a nice blend. So a couple good shakes over this. And then we'll add a little bit of oregano. And then I'm going to give this a nice little toss with some tongs, and we'll heat up some oil and get these seared off in our pan. Grab some tongs, kind of coat them up. First, let's get this little bit of oil in here. About a tablespoon should work fine with that. Just coat them and make sure we get all of those lovely spices on there. And then we'll pop them in there. Just make sure your pan gets nice and hot. And then don't overcrowd it, because if you overcrowd it, instead of getting a nice good sear on your chuck roast, it will just cause all of it to kind of let its juices out. And then you'll get, a chewier versus a lovely sear. Okay. Seem to be thoroughly coated. Once my oil is nice and hot, we'll drop in half the meat and we'll sear it off, and then we'll do the other one. While we're waiting for that, let's get our veggies prepped up for this, and then we'll work on our stew. I forgot my knife over here.
Stew or soup?
It's a soup. I don't know why I keep wanting to say stew. A lot of times when I use beef, it's a stew, but today it's going to have a light tomato beef broth, so not thick. So a soup, not a stew. It's funny because that's what we were talking about. I'm like, it's not a stew because it's going to be light. Because I wanted, with the weather being so nice, I wanted a little bit of a lighter soup with it, because I love a nice brothy based soup, especially when it is a nice weather day like this. We'll dice up our onions, and then I have celery and carrots, and then of course 4 tomatoes and some mushrooms. So pretty simple kind of vegetable base to it. And then we will also be using some fresh garlic and stelline pasta. My original thoughts today were like, oh, I think I have some barley in my pantry. I'm going to do beef and barley soup. I did not have barley in it, but that kind of got me on there. And I was like, you know what? Stelline, barley, kind of close enough. We'll go similar.
Judy sent you a gift.
Well, thank you, Judy. We appreciate that. Let's see, we're almost hot there. Let's get our carrots peeled up. I've got a collection of rainbow carrots today. There's truly a rainbow here. I've got every color on it. So it's always nice when you do get the rainbow versus all white. Here. Give them a nice peel, and then we'll dice them up so we have smaller little chunks in our soup. Cooks up a little bit faster, gets tender. And that way you can get all veggies in every bite. And we've got our yellow. Now carrots, the rainbow, there is a very, very slight difference between the sweetness level of the carrots. White being the least sweet. Orange is actually the sweetest. But it's very minimal in the differences. So they're just pretty. And who doesn't like a pretty carrot? Got it all. Always give them, if they're unpeeled, like with the baby carrots, they're already pre-washed and peeled, but always give these a peel because this outer skin is rough, has a very woody taste to it, is not as nice. And the tender underbelly is the nice part of the carrot. Okay, I think we should be nice and hot here. We should be able to drop in our first round of meat. Again, we're going to just sear this off on both sides, kind of cook it to a nice medium rare, because we're doing essentially a quick version of a soup so that it doesn't have to cook all day to get tender. We'll put it in half of it, and we'll do it in batches. So just make sure that each piece gets its own spot on the bottom of your pan. And then we'll flip it once we start to see some brown rings kind of coming up around the sides of each piece of meat. A few more pieces in there. But I always find with your soup, just cut them out small. You don't want to leave your chunks too big because, think about how you eat a soup. You eat it with a spoon. So if you have really big chunks of meat or big chunks of vegetables, it makes it kind of hard to eat. That's the same thing. Like when I make my vegetables for soup, they're very different than like sizes in the vegetables I make for like spaghetti and meatballs. Sometimes with my spaghetti and meatballs, I'll go really big with the meatball, but in the soup, I try to keep them on the smaller side. Let's get our carrots cut up and prepped up. That way we'll have them ready to kind of start our kind of caramelization, and then we can work on our base for our scones on here. So we're going to just quarter them and then give them a nice little dice up here. And then hopefully we'll have this first batch done and out on here. And then we'll make our lovely blueberry lemon scones, which if you're not, familiar with a scone, they are a delicious kind of treat, but they're one that you don't have to feel so guilty about. They're not as sweet as a cookie. I always like to say they're kind of like a hybrid between a cookie and a biscuit. You've got that nice little, crunch and sweetness of a cookie, but you've got that fluffiness on the inside of a biscuit. I do love a good scone. And they've got a lot less sugar in them and butter in them than, say, a cookie or so. They are lovely. And we're going to use our sourdough discard in them, which, again, of course, always makes them a little bit more gut healthy. Get these last ones up, and then we're going to flip them. As you can see, our beef is starting to get a nice kind of brown ring around the side. Since we do want to cook them at a nice medium rare, we'll flip them, and then they only need about 30 seconds or so on the other side to cook up, and they will continue cooking once we remove them from the pan. So you don't want to overcook them, because then you're going to have a bit more of a chewy meat. So flip them over. You can see they have a lovely sear. All of those meat drippings will add great flavor to our stock for our soup. We're going to saute our vegetables in it, and they'll be lovely. Got these guys flipped over. Let them cook up. I'm going to go get a bowl so that we can start grabbing them out. Grab a bigger one. And again, I like to cook them until they have a nice little bit of pink on the inside. And then they will continue to cook when you remove them out. Just that residual heat. They're cut up little, so be very careful not to overcook them. Little pieces of meat are going to cook much faster than larger pieces. Okay, so we've got our first round of our meat seared off in here. I'm going to drop off our last round and get it into our pan, spread out so that each piece has its spot on the bottom of the bowl. On here, there. And I'm doing this on a high heat because I want it to sear off. I don't want it to just release all its juices out. I want it to get a nice, good kind of crispy edge on it. Okay, we've got these. Let's get our celery, and then we'll have our aromatic vegetables, which will be the base of our stock, done, and then we can work on our scones. Well, you know what? Let's start. We'll work on our scones right now because we've got a good minute here. We can get this ready going. Let's start out. We're going to mix our dry base, then we'll make our wet base, and then we'll mix them in. We'll do our press and folds and get to everything there. So for our dry base, we're going to start with 2 cups of flour. And you're going to use an all-purpose flour for this. So we've got 1 and 2. And then we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. So there's not a lot of sugar in this. And this is going to make 16 mini scones that are like, that big on there. But good size. Get that chunk out. So just a 1/2 cup. We will make a glaze to go on top of them, which gives them a little bit of extra sweetness, which I think is that perfect little hint on there. So we've got a 1/2 cup of sugar. Let's see, just check my meat here. I think we are ready to flip it. So we'll take a pause on here. And we're going to flip our meat over. As you can see, we've got these brown rings on it. So we're going to flip it over. and sear it off on the other side. And get just again, it's going to go nice and quick on the other side. And you don't want to cook them too long. You want them to still be pink in the middle so that they're nice medium rare, because we will be adding them back into our soup broth later, which will be nice and warm. And when you take them out of the pan, they continue to cook. And the cameraman is already enjoying the little meat bites by him. I think that's why he enjoys being the cameraman and making sure the plate of meat gets put all the way by him. We'll sear this off really quickly, and then we can add our onions in, and then we can finish back up there. But this, really, it doesn't need very long. That first side takes the longest because you cook the majority through, and then the second time is you're just doing a really quick sear on it to kind of get rid of that, that pink edge for it. I'll get these guys in here. And we'll pull this out, and then we're going to add our onions in, and we'll have our onions start to saute, and then we'll add in, after they've got a minute to kind of caramelize, we'll put in our carrots, we'll get our celery and some garlic in there, and then finally our mushrooms, and then our tomatoes. But you'll have this lovely little meat drippings right here. You don't want to just throw your vegetables in with your onions and your with that, because then your meat will get really, really tough because you'll keep cooking it. And that's fine with a stew that you're going to let simmer for an hour or two. But with a quick soup like this, if you do that, you'll have very tough chunks of meat in there. So always take it out. That way your vegetables have a chance to kind of cook on their own. They get their time at the bottom of the pan. I'm going to turn my heat down to about a 4.5. So it can kind of cook over a medium heat. And I'm going to add just a little bit more olive oil in here. We started off with about a tablespoon. I'm going to add in about another teaspoon, just enough to get a nice little coating on there since some of it was used up. We're going to let those onions cook for a second. So let's finish up over here. We're going to use 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And this is going to be for our lemon blueberry scones. So 2 teaspoons of baking powder. 1, 2. We already have 2 cups of flour in here and 1/2 cup of sugar. We're going to do 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm going to give this a quick mix. And this is kind of our dry mixture that we will cut our butter into. So let's give this a good mix around.
You have a question? What cut of beef are you using for the soup?
I'm using a chuck roast. So it was about 1.5 pounds chuck roast, and I trimmed off some fat, so we're probably a little bit less than that. But I do love a great chuck roast for a stew because it is a nice tender piece of meat. But you can always use stew meat, which typically is a variety of different cuts. I'm going to grab a stick of cold butter out of the fridge because you want to use nice cold butter for our scones. We're going to kind of cube it, and then I'm going to use my pastry knife here, and we'll cut it into our flour. And this is going to give the nice flaky layers in our scones. So I always start by kind of quartering it like this and start with smaller chunks so that it's a little bit easier, does a bit of the work on there. Now, if you don't want to use it, if you don't have a pastry blade, you don't want to use a pastry blade, you can always use a food processor or 2 knives, or you can do the old school where you just pinch the butter and the flour between your fingers. That one, of course, takes a lot longer to do. Same with the double knives, but they all work. My preferred method is with the pastry blade when I'm just doing a small batch of it because it's really easy to clean up. While the convenience of the a food processor gets it done quick, it's a pain to clean. You got to haul it out. You've got all the different parts. It takes up a lot of real estate in the washing or the dishwasher. And, when you're a large family, you don't want to give up that much space. And it's such a pain to wash on its own. So this is a very easy tool to wash. And we're going to cut it into it until you have no pieces bigger than a pea. And that's simply to avoid like a butter pocket in your scone, which while it's not the worst thing, it just prevents you from getting really nice flaky layers. And every so often, I'm just going to use my butter knife here to clean out any butter that sticks between my blades. And then we'll get going here. But cutting up instead of just sticking a full stick of butter in there helps this process go a lot faster. But make sure you use really cold butter, because if your butter is room temperature or has been sitting out for a little bit, then it gets more mushy versus cold, and you're not going to get as nice of a flaky layer on there. And we'll cut this around. Again, doesn't take too long to actually get there. Just a little bit of elbow grease, but it's a good workout, especially if you do it by hand. Although I have to say my arms are definitely a little bit sore from my workout today, so, and doing the yard work on there. I've already met my goal. My goal is always to try to get 15,000 steps, and I'm already at almost 19,000 steps for the day. I think, what is that? My exact step count is 19,024 steps. So we're almost, got that part beat. I think I'll be probably by the end of the day, I'll be close to 25,000. It's always nice when I have, depending on which workout I choose to do, want some give me a lot of steps. And then of course, cleaning up the yard is always a big one.
I do have a question. Do you know what you're doing yet for dinner?
For dinner, I do actually have an idea. We're going to be doing a combination lo mein. So I'm going to do a steak and chicken lo mein for it. So that's the base thing with some like teriyaki vegetables, kind of like a stir-fry vegetable dish for it. So I do have that because I'm trying to use up everything that I bought before I start my butcher block, my butcher box that I got, which I should be able to start using it tomorrow because I've used up all of pretty much my proteins that I bought from earlier in the week. Give my onions a quick stir here. They're sauteing up nicely. I'm going to add in my carrots. Let them have a moment. A runaway carrot. And then, since my butter is almost, it looks like it's completely cut into my flour, we are going to make our wet mixture, and we will, then we can add that into our dry mixture for our scones. Let me just give my hands a quick rinse. Okay. So right now we've got in here pretty much completely cut into it. You can see we have no really big chunks left in here, just nice smaller ones in there. So we've got that. Just push out any bit that's stuck in my blade because we don't want to waste any butter. And we'll set this to the side, and let's make our wet mixture. So this is going to start out with a half a cup of our sourdough discard. You can also use active starter. Mine is active because I fed it up this morning because I'm going to be making some sourdough later today. So it's a little bit bubbly, but that is a-okay. Just give it a nice stir. This is a nice active starter. You can see it's nice and bubbly there, but when I pop it, it's going to shrink down.
Yeah, question. Where did you get your apron?
This is a Headley and Bennett apron. I just got it for my birthday. So I love it. It's kind of a nice, fun, florally print. I'm kind of getting these like springy vibes coming along here. Summer vibes. But I thought it was cute. So we're going to start with a half a cup of our sourdough discard. I'm going to add that in here. There we go. And then we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. One, 2, 1 egg, and then 2 tablespoons of cream. We will use a little bit more cream later to brush over the top of our scones to help give them a nice kind of golden brown touch. But just 2 tablespoons to start. 1, 2. And then we're going to add in some lemon zest. So let me give this lemon a quick rinse. We're going to save our juice for our glaze because I found that fresh lemon juice in the baked good doesn't give as much lemon flavor as the lemon zest.
Yeah, question. Could you use vanilla paste instead? And if so, how much?
You could definitely use vanilla paste, and you can use about the same, equal amount. So about 2 teaspoons of it for it. They both work well. Here, give this a nice little zest here. You want about, I like to do around a tablespoon of zest to really get that lemony flavor to it, to get it popping. The most of that really strong lemon flavor is going to come through in that fresh lemon glaze that we put on top, because we're going to use the fresh lemon juice and then powdered sugar and then just a teensy bit of cream to give it a nice little bit of body. So essentially just 1 whole lemon. Get it around here and try just to stick with a nice top yellow part of the lemon. If you go too much into the rind, you're going to get more of that rindy flavored lemon. And don't use dried lemon. Dried lemon zest is not very good. Give this a nice stir. Okay.
I have a question. What can you use in place of the starter?
In place of the starter, you can always just sub in an equal amount of flour and water, because that's what starter is just kind of fermented flour and water. So you can always make a paste of flour and water to sub in for it on there. But I highly recommend you try to do sourdough and start making it. It is something that in the beginning it might seem really challenging, but it is really easy once you've got it down, and it is so rewarding, and all the delicious things you can make with it. So it's not just bread, but scones and cookies and muffins and naan and tortillas and pasta. Like, there's just so many things that you can make with a discard, which is just so delicious. And pancakes and waffles and so much more. But always you can sub in that equal parts of like flour and water mixture to it. Okay, we've got our dry mixture. We've got our wet mixture. We're going to pour this in. I'm going to kind of get it all, try to get as much in here as possible. And then I'm going to use my fork to kind of give it a light toss till we have a little bit of a shag. Then I'm going to put in a cup of blueberries. And I like to use fresh blueberries because I find that frozen blueberries tend to add a little bit too much moisture to a scone. But you can use them, just kind of pat them a little bit dry. And turn this down just a smidge, and let's give this one more toss. We've got our rainbow carrots and our onions in here sauteing for our soup. So we're going to stir this up with our fork. You're going to have a dry shag form. And then we're going to put our blueberries in, and then we will dump this out on the counter, and we will do our press and folds. And then we will shape this into a puck. So 1 cup of blueberries. Make sure that you've rinsed them and then you've dried them well, because you don't want to add in any extra moisture. Now, I will tell you that your blueberries will run away from you during this process. So just be prepared to be catching them as you do the press and folds, but they are worth it. You can always take the extra time to cut them in half if you want to. I just like to play the game where you have to just catch them. So we've got our bowl here, and You're going to start, and what you're going to start with is you're going to press everything down. And this is how you develop your flaky layers. You press, and then we're going to fold everything on top of each other. And just take those blueberries when they roll out and push them in and fold on top. It's okay if you smush one and they burst. That's a-okay on there. Just as they roll away. That's why I always say they do like to roll. But it's nice. You can always cut them in half, but I prefer them whole on there because then you get those nice ones that don't burst completely in cooking, and they're just lovely. So do your press and folds over this. Now, every press and fold is going to create these flaky layers, and that's what makes the scones just amazing. And you can see it started out as a dry kind of pile, and it's coming together. Once we've gotten it completely worked together, we'll shape it into 2 pucks to make our scones. And just pick it up, flip it over, press it down. Don't knead it, it's just your press and your folds. Okay. I'm going to get my pastry cutter. We're going to divide this dough in half. And now I'm just going to press it into a puck shape. You'll get a little bit of stickage, no worries. Any blueberries, just pop them back on there. And you want to do it about 1.5 inches thick because I like a nice big fat thick one when you do it because they'll bake up nice and tall. And I try to get them roughly the same size. And then what we'll do is I'm going to just take my pastry cutter and we'll move it onto our parchment paper. And I'm going to go give my hands a quick rinse. That way I'm not so sticky. And then we're going to cut these, each one into 8 pieces. And then we'll slide them apart and brush them with a little bit of cream, sprinkle a little bit of sugar over them, and bake these up at 400 degrees for 18 minutes. And then when they're done baking, hopefully everything else is ready. We'll make a lovely lemon glaze to go on top of them using fresh lemon juice, which really brings out that lemon flavor on here. So we're going to slice these through, and then we're going to pull them apart. So this is my husband's favorite scone recipe I make, and they are pretty fantastic. I will tell you, they really embody that like bright, happy flavor of like a lemon and blueberry together. Just so lovely. Now, don't go too much. Always, I say minimal. Don't go more than a cup on blueberries. This is not one of those recipes that you want to add more on because too many blueberries will mess with the liquid content in the scone and will make them more mushy versus a nice kind of flaky base to it.
If you only have frozen blueberries, should you defrost them first?
Yes, defrost them and then let them pat them dry so that they don't have a lot of moisture on them because they'll be full of just that basic liquid on them, and you don't want them to seep into it as you do your press and folds as much. Because as you can see, we started out with a dry mixture, and even the fresh blueberries, it makes them a lot more wet than a lot of my other scone bases. Okay, let's get these guys brushed with about a tablespoon of cream. I'm going to grab a small bowl here. And this will give you a nice kind of golden brown top to it. So if you don't want to make a glaze and you just want to eat them as is, that is a-okay.
Do you post your recipes anywhere?
I do post all of my lives so that everybody can always watch and recreate my recipes by watching the videos. For my members, I send out recipe cards every, a couple times a month. And I do believe this is a recipe card that I have available for my members on there. So that one is there. And I am.
What does the cream do?
The cream gives this a nice kind of golden brown crust. And then we're going to sprinkle some sugar on top of it, which will help that sugar kind of dissolve and give a nice little sweet little crunch on there. So it's really for a pretty kind of golden bake on it. And it also prevents it from baking, getting too dark on the top. Keeps a little bit of that moisture in. Here. Perfect. So you don't need a whole lot, just a little bit. And then we'll sprinkle with a little bit of sugar. You don't need a lot. Again, just a little bit. So a little pinch. And I do this because scones are not very sweet. They're mildly sweet, but they only have a half a cup of sugar in them, compared to like a cookie that typically has between the two sugars, between 1.5, and 2 cups of sugar. So it's a much more like a lighter fare in it.
Can you do an egg wash instead?
You can definitely do an egg wash. It gives you a nice shiny coat on it. I just never like to do an egg wash because it wastes the whole egg because you need so little for it. So, but yes, same concept for it on there. We're going to pop these in the oven at 400 degrees for 18 minutes. And pop them right here. And I'm going to set my timer here for 18 minutes at 400 degrees. Got it going. Okay, let me rinse my hands. Let's get our soup finished up. We'll get our grilled cheese going, and we'll make our glaze. So kind of down to the final bit. We've got some celery here that we're going to use up in there. We've got our carrots and our onions sauteing up well. But the base of this is, we just essentially have those aromatic vegetables like a mirepoix. And they're just going to add a lot of great flavor to this. And then we'll also add in some mushrooms and some fresh tomatoes, which will give a nice kind of tomatoey acidic base to our beef broth that we'll be using. But I've cut them up so they're slightly smaller bits of celery. That way you're not getting a huge chunk, but little aromatic bits. We'll let that saute. We'll get a little bit of garlic minced up and our mushrooms in. And then lastly, we'll get our tomatoes in and our stelline pasta and our broth simmering. And we'll make our grilled cheese sandwich. And then we'll finish up our soup.
What's your all-time favorite grilled cheese sandwich?
My all-time favorite grilled cheese sandwich is probably... it's a play on a French onion soup grilled cheese. So you take caramelized onions and you saute them they're sauteed and they're golden. And then you use a mix of like Gouda and Gruyere cheese. And it's just so delicious. You could also throw in some sauteed mushrooms. That's probably my favorite. Or, just a classic like triple cheese. I love a good grilled cheese sandwich. I could eat one every day. Sometimes I do. Let's get that kind of heating up here. I'm going to mince up my garlic. A couple cloves. We'll throw in a couple spices too, to get some flavors on there. So I've got 4 cloves, although 2 of these are like the giant size cloves. So it could be about a tablespoon of fresh garlic. And mince them up nice so that we have little bits and infuse that flavor into the broth as well. And if you don't have fresh, this would be a good one that you could sub in some garlic because, again, it's a sidekick and not a main flavor for this dish. And nice little bit.
Rhonda, thank you again.
Well, thank you, Rhonda. We appreciate that. So we've got that in. We'll add this into our dish. Okay, so we've got our garlic in here. I'll give my hands a wrench because they're very garlicky. Give it a good stir so it can kind of caramelize up, and we'll get our mushroom sliced so that we can start sauteing off our mushrooms because we want them to cook off, a little bit before we get our tomatoes in. That way they can get a good sear on them. Tomatoes are, pretty wet, and so once you add those in, it's like adding a liquid. And kind of my rule of thumb when I'm making a soup or a stew is, you start with your aromatic. So I always start with my onion first because it always needs a little bit of, time on its own. And then you go firmest to softest and driest to wettest. So, onion followed by like carrot, celery, and this dish mushroom, and then tomato. But just think about what vegetables you're using and kind of use that as your way. That way they all can get a good saute on them for it. As soon as you start adding in, your more delicate ones, which are your softer vegetables, they won't get as nice of a cook on as your firm ones or your wetter ones. So get these. You know what? I think we'll do one more. We'll save that big guy for another day. You can always use pre-sliced mushrooms. I like to slice my mushrooms on their own because I slice them a bit thinner than what you get pre-sliced, and they stay fresher longer. When you buy them already sliced, they tend to get slimy pretty quick. So give this a quick stir, and then we'll get our mushrooms in here, and we'll throw in some dry spices and let them cook up with the mushrooms, and then we'll get our tomatoes in there. Here. Smells wonderful. That garlic always just smells so nice, especially with the celery and the onions for this. Just delicious. Here. So essentially we have a mirepoix, which is a base of our onions, celery, and carrots. We've got our rainbow carrots in there. We got some fresh garlic, and then our mushrooms that we're going to saute up here for just a second. And then let's add in some spices. We're going to use some of the same spices that we cooked our meat on. So I have some herbes de Provence. We're going to use about a teaspoon. Nice little sprinkle around. And this is an herbes de Provence blend with some lavender in it. So it has a little bit of a florally note to it, which is lovely. I'm going to put in a bay leaf. That's a small one, so we'll do 2. A little bit of oregano, about a teaspoon. And then a little bit of black pepper. Give those a quick toss on here. And then we'll let that simmer for a second as we prep up our sandwich over here. So let me clear this area just a bit, and then we'll get our sandwiches prepped up. We still got to make our glaze on here. We have about 10 minutes left on our scones baking, which should be right around the right amount of time. Okay. So I have some leftover pepperoni sourdough bread with mozzarella cheese, and we are going to make essentially a pepperoni Italian sandwich using this sourdough bread, which was so delicious. But then we made up some more and biscuits, and we never got to it. So now it's at the stage where it's like you either want to toast it or put it in a sandwich, which is what we're going to do. You can just see we've got this just lovely like little chunks of pepperoni all throughout, and there's little bits of mozzarella cheese all throughout. I like to, when I make my pepperoni sourdough loaves, I like to even this out a little bit, but make it where I cut up the pepperoni into smaller chunks so that it's not a big piece of pepperoni.
If you didn't have sourdough, what would be your next choice for bread?
Like a crusty Italian, a bread with a good crust on it typically works the best for one of these kind of type sandwiches. And a nice rich one. Fluffy breads don't work as well for grilled cheeses or stuff like that, because you want that crisp on there. Let me grab some soft butter. We're going to take the outside and just find your 2 smoothest outsides, and we'll spread a little bit of room temperature butter on it. Let me grab my griddle pan. Have that start heating up. And you don't need a whole lot, just a little bit, so you get that good crispy edge on it. And then we'll get this going. There we go. Don't have the most even slices, but that's okay. I know this year I was like, I'm going to make smaller sourdough so that I can do it more often. But now I've found out that I don't always have a lot of sourdough left over for making grilled cheeses. So maybe I need to just rethink this and make some bigger loaves or whatnot, because, or we've just been eating it through. I'm not sure which one. We're just eating more, or I don't know. So I've got some mozzarella cheese here, and we're going to just slice some up, nice kind of thin slices. The nice thing about doing just pre-slicing it yourself, you can actually make them a little bit thinner than what you get at the store, which means you can have that nice kind of double layer, no problem. And we've got our mousse slicer today.
Do you have a recipe for your sourdough?
I do. I actually have a recipe card available for everybody, and a video on how you can make your own starter and your very own loaf from start to beginning. Because I understand that for a lot of people, and I remember for me when I first started out, it's kind of confusing if you don't know the terminology and what everything means. So I created a whole tutorial on how to do it, so that people could really create it on their own and be successful, because there are a lot of terms, and it is very, very different from traditional yeast breads and whatnot. So I do have that available, as well as a step-by-step guide to make your own starter. Now, just know that if you do want to do sourdough and you've never made it before, this is not something you're like, I'm going to make sourdough today. It takes about a week for your starter to get to an active enough base for it to create bread. And then making a bread typically takes about 24 hours before you can bake it up. I've got layers of pepperoni on here and layers of salami, and then we'll just do one more layer of our cheese to go on top.
And you always get this question, where did you get the mousse slicer?
This mousse slicer was given to me by my mom. She got it in Germany at some, little mom and pop store. I know he's very beloved on there, but fortunately, I don't think you can find him anywhere. He's one of my favorite. I have an exceptional number of cheese slicers. And one of these days, I'm going to make a video, a short, just to show everyone, and I'm not joking, how many cheese slicers I have, because I'm a great lover of cheese.
And they're all gifted.
They are all gifted. I have never bought a cheese slicer myself, and I have 10 of them. So many of them, and cheese knives and cheese things. But you know what? Cheese is a very important part of my life. I love cheese. My family loves cheese. That's a part of the Swedish smorgasbord, is you have a whole course dedicated to cheese and cold meats and cold fish. And, when you're a kid, you live for the cheese because you weren't eating the pickled herring. And even as an adult, you live for the cheese because you're not eating the pickled herring. It's there, and I make it, and I look at it, and I tie it. And every year I'm like, why do I keep making this? But I make it.
Can you go over the ingredients for the soup so far?
Yes. So we started out by searing off our meat on there. So we have chuck roast that's seared off, and we pulled that out. And then we cooked up our onions. So one whole onion, about 5 small carrots that we diced up and sauteed in there with our onions. And then around 4 stalks of celery that we diced up, some fresh garlic, and then about 8 ounces of mushrooms that I sliced up. Now we're going to add in some freshly diced tomatoes. which will add a nice acidity to this broth to it, but it's going to be a little bit lighter than, like a kind of pepper stew. So you're going to have like a hint of like almost like a beef bourguignon. The beef bourguignon, you will use like red wine and tomato paste. I'm going to be using just fresh tomatoes and then beef bouillon, but you'll have kind of those same flavors because we do have essentially a mirepoix here. We have our mushrooms, so very similar, different, like a fresher, lighter version of it. Like spring is coming version, which is just nice. Get these up there for my tomatoes. You can also use diced, a can of diced tomatoes. I would use 2 since I have 4 tomatoes in here and I want that juice from it. We'll add that again, lovely acidity to it and a nice kind of chunky veggie to it.
Judy sent you a balloon crown.
No, thank you.
Oh, where'd you get your knives?
My knives, I've actually had these knives for almost 17 years. They were a wedding gift. They're Wusthof. This is the classic thing. I got a collection for my as a wedding present, and I love them. They've been with me for almost 17 years, and I use them multiple times a day. So they have stood the test of time. Absolutely love them. They make a couple variations. The classic is my favorite because it has a really good heft to it. I like at my parents' house, they have the gourmet ones for their outdoor kitchen, which is you wouldn't think with the name gourmet, but it's a cheaper version. It's a little bit lighter, very sharp knife, but it's not as heavy. So, it just feels a little bit, lighter in your hands on there, but it's still a great knife on there. We've got our tomatoes coming in here. We're going to give this a quick stir. We're going to throw in our stelline pasta. We're going to let this simmer. And then we've got about 3 minutes left on our scones. We've got to make our glaze up. Let's get our stelline pasta in here. This is a small pasta. It cooks up pretty quickly. We're going to let it simmer for just a second. Don't put too much pasta in. That is one mistake that a lot of people make when making a soup with a pasta in it, is they put way too much. You're going to need for this soup around, I want to say, a 1/3 cup of pasta. And it's going to fill up my hand, just a good basin size like this. We'll sprinkle it around. They expand, they get much bigger. If you put too much in there, what happens is it's going to suck up all of your delicious broth base to your soup. And then you'll have more of a pasta dish than a soup. So we'll kind of coat that in there. And then I'm going to add in my broth, I guess. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to add in water, and then we're going to mix it with some beef bouillon. So we're going to add in about 1 cup first. I'm going to kind of deglaze the bottom of my pan. Scrape off any of those spices that we have on there, because we've got our herbes de Provence and our bay leaf and oregano in there. Add a little bit more. Give it a nice stir. And then finish up with the rest of it. Beautiful. And once this comes to a nice simmer here, and when we're ready, we'll add in our meat. But let's add in our beef bouillon. We're going to add in a heaping spoonful. Essentially, you need 4 teaspoons, which is about a heaping spoonful, because we added in 4 cups of water.
You got a question? How'd you get your kids to eat soups and vegetables?
I made a decision when they were younger that I was not going to be a short order cook, and that they were going to eat the family meals. And that's kind of how I was growing up. My mom made one meal for us because I came from a very large family, and she always said, I can't please you all. So she made one meal for everyone, and that's what we had to eat. And that's just kind of how it's always been. And I just make sure that I serve up a wide variety of sides, that there's always something in there that the kids like, a bread, the fruit, the veggie, some sort of thing, so that there always is something there. And then they just, since they've had it since they were little, they just don't know any better. And so that's what they like. Like, I will say my little ones, they absolutely love soups. Teddy just always talks about how much he loves soups. Jack loves them. They're very messy when they eat them, but they love him. Let's get this guy out. We've got our beautiful blueberry scones here. Nice and kissed at the top here, that golden edge on there. We're gonna let them sit here. We're gonna whip up our glaze while it's sitting on there. But it's just exposure, keeping them when they're young, and then just making sure that you aren't making like separate dishes and stuff like that where then they're like, oh, well, I want to eat a peanut butter and jelly, or I want to eat chicken nuggets. If they think that's the option, then they're good. They'll always go to it. But that's all they have. And I do have picky eaters. I will say that age range from like 9 to 11, all of my kids were really picky, and they ate mainly the protein and the fruit. That's what they would eat. But then my older kids, they eat everything. They'll try everything much better. My husband is a picky eater. He's difficult. That's very difficult. That's where I think my kids get it from on there. I'm a very adventurous eater. I'm like the exact opposite. My parents are very adventurous eaters. So I do make my lunchtime meals more adventurous on there because they're mainly for like my husband and I, and then my parents. And then I will say like the little boys or like the kids get from school, this is like their afternoon snack. They always eat the baked goods, but they'll pick around and see what they get there. My 14-year-old son, he loves it. He's like, what do we have today? We're going to make our glaze. So we're going to use fresh lemon juice. So we'll squeeze it in here. We'll fish out all of these lemon seeds because apparently this lemon decided it was going to be the seediest lemon on earth. And this is just half the lemon. And I swear I could create a whole new lemon orchard here. Oh, we get that. Let me grab a spoon. And I don't know if it's just because when you're younger, you just don't realize it, but I swear lemons did not have nearly as many seeds as they do now. Or maybe, you just never realize them as much. I remember watermelons having all the seeds because you always, think, but don't remember this, but I find that sometimes I get lemons and there are just so many seeds. Let's check this real quick. Ready for our next flip on here. Getting our things ready.
Have you ever tried the seedless lemons?
I don't see them at the store, so I have not tried them. I'm on there. You know what I mean? It's like I just grab whatever the produce there is, and I've never seen it. But it would be nice to not have to fish out seeds. Okay, we're going to mix in a little bit of powdered sugar, and then we'll add in our cream. Don't add your cream into your lemon juice, or your lemon juice will curdle your cream. Mix it with some sugar first, then add your cream, and then add the rest of your powdered sugar for it. But you got to mix it a little bit because otherwise the acidity will curdle it right away. But the cream gives a nice richness to your glaze that just is lovely. There we go. And then we're going to mix this until we have the consistency of like glue. And start with a little bit of liquid and a little bit of cream. I use just juice from half a lemon and then about a tablespoon of cream. And that's going to take about a cup of powdered sugar. A little bit of liquid can take a whole lot of sugar, and you don't want to have to be adding and adding and adding sugar to get, to the consistency, because then it's just waste. So start small. And once it's nice and thick, we'll drizzle this over. You don't want to drizzle it on your scones right when they come out of the oven. You need to let them cool down for, a few minutes, because when they're super hot, it will completely run off, but you want them to be warm so that it oozes over and creates kind of a nice thin coating on it. Now, if you want it to be a thicker coating, then let them cool down a little bit more. That way it won't run off as much. But I like that nice thinner glaze coating on there. Think about a donut and how it's got that thin glaze. Not a frosting, but a glaze. Almost there. See, I said Takes a lot, little by little. There we go. And then I like to use a whisk because the whisks help break up the chunks of powdered sugar.
Where'd you get that whisk?
This whisk, you know what? I believe it's like an OXO whisk, which I love. So I'm guessing it's a Target one on there. I love the nice silicone one because before I had my Hexclad, you know, you had all the other like nonstick pans, which you're not allowed to use metal in because you can ruin them. And so I've still stuck with like the silicone coated because it's heat resistant and it protects everything. And I love my whisk that way. And it's a firm whisk. Okay. We are just about ready. Let's get our soup's got a nice bubble on it. Let me give it a good stir here with a ladle, and then we'll toss our meat in. We'll drizzle up our scones, and we'll be about ready to serve up here. Beautiful. You can see our noodles are already starting to grow in size. Beautiful. Okay. Give it a good stir. I'm going to turn off my grilled cheeses.
And what's in the soup?
So this right now we have in here, we have onions, celery, tomatoes, mushrooms, carrots, garlic, and then our herbs and seasonings. And then we're going to add in our stelline pasta. And then we're going to add in our seared off chunks of chuck roast, which will give a just lovely kind of flavor to it. Make sure you add in all of those drippings from it on there, but we cooked all those vegetables and those drippings for it, but it'll be just wonderful. But you see, it's not a stew, but a soup because you've got a nice kind of thin base broth to it. And it's fresh. It's honestly kind of like a play on a beef bourguignon, but with a fresh kind of notes to it. Let's drizzle up our scones here, and we will be ready to serve up our lunch. Okay, here's our beautiful thing. We're gonna glaze right over the top. You see, just like kind of Elmer's glue over the top of it, you know what I mean? But this has a nice, lovely lemon sweetness to that. That little bit of cream gives it a little bit of richness and body to it, so it's not as tart, but it has that mellow, wonderful lemon sweetness to it. There we go. Beautiful. Perfect. So those are our lemon blueberry scones. Well, let's get ready to serve up our lunch here. Grab a little thing out of here. Slide this guy out of the way. And we can cut our grilled cheeses in half here. Beautiful. Look at that. Gorgeous. And I'm going to grab a bowl for our soup. Wonderful. I'm going to slide this up here. Okay. For lunch today, we have our pepperoni and salami grilled cheese on our homemade pepperoni sourdough bread with mozzarella cheese that we toasted up. And then we are going to serve this with our homemade beef and stellini soup with a lovely beef and tomato broth. We used 4 fresh tomatoes diced up, onions, celery, mushrooms, carrots, herbs de Provence, bay leaves in here, but just wonderful flavor for our soup on there. It's a play on a lighter version of a beef bourguignon. So just wonderful, bright freshness to it. And then for a little sweet treat at the end, we have our lovely homemade blueberry sourdough scones with a lovely lemon glaze to it, and we have lemon zest in them. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made. Our fresh kind of beef and vegetable soup with our blueberry lemon scones. And you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my hex cod pans, my Dutch ovens, my knives, my cutting boards, all the different things that I use in the kitchen. But again, thank you so much for joining us